In the small village of Umuoma, there lived a man named Chijioke. From the outside, he seemed like an ordinary man, but those who knew him well understood that he was far from that. Chijioke was known for one thing above all else, his laziness. It was a sunny afternoon, and the hustle and bustle of the village could be heard from every corner. Women were pounding yam, children were running around barefoot, and the men were either working in the fields or engaging in lively discussions. But there was one man, sitting under the shade of an old tree, sipping palm wine from a calabash. This was Chijioke. His clothes were ragged, his face unshaven, and his eyes heavy from the day's heat. He barely noticed the children playing nearby, the dust rising with each kick of the ball. His focus was entirely on the palm wine in his hand, and a loud chuckle escaped his lips as he swapped stories with his equally lazy friends. His thoughts weren't on his wife or his home, they never were. His wife, Ngozi, was quite different. As the daughter of a prominent farmer in the village, she had inherited a strong work ethic. She woke up every morning before dawn to tend to the family's farm, gathered firewood, fetched water from the river, and cared for their 2 children. She did it all, yet it seemed like Chijioke never noticed. When Ngozi married Chijioke, she believed he would change. She thought that with her support and love, he would step up and become the man she knew he could be. But as the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, her hope began to fade. One afternoon, after coming back from the market with a heavy basket of yams on her head, Ngozi stumbled upon Chijioke, lounging on the veranda, his legs stretched out and his eyes half closed. "Ngozi, you've returned?" Chijioke asked lazily, his voice hoarse from his earlier drinking. "I didn't know when you left this morning." Ngozi stood still for a moment, her heart sinking. Her shoulders were heavy from the weight of the basket, but her soul felt even heavier. "Yes, I've been to the market. And I've also done the laundry, fed the children, and cleaned the house. But what about you, Chijioke?" Her voice was firm, but her eyes were filled with unshed tears. Chijioke sat up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He didn't sense the weight in her voice, the frustration hidden behind her calm exterior. "I've been thinking," he replied with a yawn. "You know, the sun's too hot to work today. Let's just take it easy." Ngozi's face tensed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She placed the basket down, but her body language betrayed her growing anger and exhaustion. She turned away, not wanting to say more but knowing that the cycle of disappointment would continue unless something changed. Days passed, and Ngozi became weaker and weaker. The toll of working non-stop, the emotional exhaustion, and the pressure of carrying the family on her back were beginning to take their toll on her body. One night, as she lay on their small bed, feverish and pale, she called out to Chijioke. "Chijioke, come here." Chijioke was drunk again, his words slurring as he stumbled toward their room. He flopped onto the bed beside her, hardly noticing the cold sweat on her forehead. "What is it now, Ngozi?" he asked, his voice lazy. But there was a shift in his tone, something deeper, perhaps guilt, but he wouldn't admit it yet. Ngozi's hand reached out weakly to hold his. "Chijioke. I've been carrying this family on my own for so long. You don't see me anymore. You don't see how tired I am." Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I need you to be a man, Chijioke. For our children. For me. Please." For the first time, Chijioke felt a sharp pang in his chest. His wife, the woman who had done everything for him, was asking for nothing more than his support. He looked at her face, flushed with fever, her eyes filled with both pain and hope, and something inside him shifted. But the change wasn't immediate. Chijioke had spent years avoiding responsibility, and the path to transformation would be long. The next morning, Chijioke woke up to find Ngozi still lying in bed, weak but trying to sit up. She was slowly recovering, but the energy had been drained from her. Chijioke walked outside, feeling the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. "Today, I'll start working," he said quietly to himself. "I'll make things right. His first attempt was to go to the farm, but the soil was harder than he remembered. His muscles ached after just a few minutes of digging. He bent over, sweat dripping down his forehead, his hands blistering. But he didn't stop. The thought of Ngozi, weak and tired, drove him forward. Ngozi watched from the window, a small smile forming on her lips as she saw him working. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After the day he helped Ngozi in the farm, Chijioke had felt something deep within him, a spark of realization that perhaps he could do more for his family. But as the morning sun rose the following day, that spark quickly began to fade. He woke up early, feeling sore from yesterday's labor. His back ached, and the thought of working in the hot sun seemed unbearable. He glanced at Ngozi, who was already out of bed, preparing for another day of hard work. But he quickly turned over, pretending to sleep. Let her do it. She's strong, he mumbled to himself as he closed his eyes again, the warm breeze lulling him back into his old ways. Ngozi, as usual, had already finished a few tasks by the time she came into the house. She stopped by the door and noticed that Chijioke was still in bed. Her eyebrows furrowed in frustration, but she didn't speak immediately. She prepared breakfast for the children and began sweeping the floor. After some time, she finally confronted him. Chijioke, she called out softly, her voice a mixture of concern and disappointment. Why didn't you help today? You promised me you would. Chijioke shifted in bed, his face still buried in the pillow. Ngozi, I worked hard yesterday, the sun was too hot, I just can't do it again today, he said, finding an excuse. Ngozi stood still for a moment, her chest tightening. She had heard these excuses before. She clenched her fists at her sides. But you can try, Chijioke. You need to help me. I can't keep doing everything by myself, her voice cracked with the weight of her years of struggle. But Chijioke didn't seem to notice her pain. He sighed, getting out of bed and heading to his usual spot, the local drinking shop. I'll be back soon, he muttered, grabbing a few coins from the jar in the corner, coins that Ngozi had earned through hours of hard work. Ngozi stared at him, shaking her head in disbelief. Why? Why won't you change? Her words hung in the air as she turned back to the kitchen, a feeling of helplessness overwhelming her. Days turned into weeks, and Chijioke's promises of change remained just that, promises. Every time he would swear to do better, he would fall back into his old, lazy habits. Ngozi would argue with him, beg him, and even shout at him, but nothing changed. Her frustration grew with each passing day. Chijioke, if you don't change, what will happen to our children? What will happen to us? She would shout, tears welling in her eyes as her body shook with exhaustion. Chijioke would nod, his eyes full of guilt, but deep down, he always found an excuse to avoid responsibility. I'll try tomorrow, Ngozi. Just let me rest today, okay? And so, he would continue to drink, while Ngozi continued to work herself to the bone. It became an unbearable cycle, one that Ngozi feared might never end. One morning, things took a drastic turn. Ngozi woke up feeling dizzy, but she ignored it, thinking it was just exhaustion. However, by midday, she could barely stand. Her body was trembling, and her stomach churned with pain. She collapsed in the garden, gasping for air, her heart racing. Chijioke, who was lounging nearby, heard her cries. For the first time in months, he sprang to his feet and rushed to her side. Ngozi. What's wrong? His voice was frantic, his usual laziness gone as he lifted her in his arms. Ngozi could barely speak, her voice faint. Chijioke. I don't feel good. Please, take me to the hospital. Chijioke panicked, rushing her to the village hospital. The doctor ran some tests, and after what seemed like an eternity, he delivered the news that would change everything. Your wife is very sick, the doctor said grimly. She needs immediate surgery. If we don't act soon, her condition will worsen. The surgery will cost 5 million naira. Chijioke stood there, dumbfounded. His mind raced. He had no money. He had no property. Everything he had relied on Ngozi's hard work. He tried to hold it together, but his hands trembled as he turned to Ngozi. Ngozi. I don't have the money. I don't know what to do. Ngozi, weak and fragile, looked up at him with a faint smile. I've spent all I have on medicine over the past months. But I know you'll figure it out. Chijioke spent the next few days in a haze of panic and desperation. He went to his family, his friends, and even his in-laws, but no one would help. They all knew of his laziness, how he had wasted every opportunity given to him. He walked aimlessly through the village, asking for help, but each door was closed to him. He came back home, defeated. His body was slumped, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. But then, something deep inside him stirred. I have to change. I have to save my wife, he thought, a new fire igniting within him. For the first time in years, Chijioke woke up at dawn, not to avoid work, but to embrace it. He prepared breakfast for the children, swept the house, and cleaned the yard. The house was suddenly spotless. He hadn't touched a broom in years, but now, he was doing everything he could to keep his family together. For 3 days, Chijioke didn't drink. He didn't waste a single coin. He began thinking like a father, like a husband. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Chijioke sat down and realized that he had a farm. He had crops, land, and tools. What he needed was the determination to farm like he never had before. He gathered a few trusted friends and family members, explaining the situation. To his surprise, they agreed to help him. Together, they worked tirelessly in the fields, planting crops and tending to the land. Chijioke worked with every ounce of strength in him. The farm grew. It wasn't easy, and there were many nights when Chijioke collapsed in exhaustion. But he kept pushing forward. His body, once weak from laziness, now grew strong from hard work. His mind became sharper as he learned to manage the farm and the workers. Months passed, and the crops began to bear fruit. Chijioke harvested his rice, beans, maize, cassava, guinea corn, and potatoes. He sold them at the market and was able to make a substantial amount of money, but still not enough for the surgery. He didn't give up. He kept farming, kept working. With every passing day, he thought of his wife and how she had suffered. He worked harder, every time pushing himself further than the day before. Finally, he had enough money. With a heart full of hope, Chijioke rushed to the hospital, clutching the money in his hands. He handed it over to the doctor, who immediately began preparations for Ngozi's surgery. When Ngozi woke up, the first thing she saw was Chijioke standing beside her, holding her hand. His face was covered in sweat, his eyes wide with relief. You did it, Chijioke, Ngozi whispered weakly, a smile tugging at her lips. You did it. Chijioke held her hand tighter, his voice trembling. I'm sorry, Ngozi. I've been foolish. I promise I'll be the husband you deserve. After Ngozi recovered fully from the surgery, she was able to fully see the change in her husband. No longer the lazy, self-centered man, Chijioke had become hardworking, responsible, and determined. With the money he had earned from the farm, he was able to take his family out of their years of struggle. But he didn't stop there. He knew Ngozi had always dreamed of having her own business. So, he decided to invest in a big wrapper business for her, as she had always shown interest in selling fabrics. Ngozi, Chijioke said with a smile, I want to open a store for you, where you can sell all the beautiful wrappers you love so much. I want you to be successful. Ngozi's eyes widened with surprise and joy. You really mean it? Her voice cracked with emotion, and she couldn't believe her ears. After all the hardship they had been through, this moment felt like a dream. Chijioke nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. I want to see you happy, Ngozi. You've worked so hard for this family, and now it's time to give you what you deserve. Chijioke didn't stop with just the wrapper business for Ngozi. He also opened a large rice mill company in their community, capitalizing on the knowledge he had gained from working on the farm. The rice mill not only helped their family but also created jobs for many others in the village. The community began to see the transformation in Chijioke. He had gone from the lazy man everyone had written off to a wealthy businessman who was now a pillar of the village. "You see, Ngozi," Chijioke said one evening, his voice full of pride, "I didn't know what I could do until you made me realize that I had to be better." Ngozi smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She had always believed in him, even when he couldn't see his own potential. "You did it, Chijioke. You changed yourself. And now, you're building something better for our family." A few months later, as they sat in their new home, Ngozi handed Chijioke an envelope. Inside was a large sum of money. His eyes widened in confusion. "What's this, Ngozi?" he asked, bewildered. Ngozi smiled softly, her eyes full of warmth. "There was never any surgery, Chijioke. I didn't need it. The doctor and I planned this whole thing. I needed you to realize how much you were capable of. And I knew that if I pretended to be sick, you would rise to the occasion. It was a test." Chijioke sat in stunned silence. You planned all this? Even the hospital visit?" Ngozi nodded. "Yes. I knew that you could change if given the right motivation. And now look at you. You've worked hard, and you've proven to me and to yourself that you can be the man I always knew you could be." Chijioke, overwhelmed with gratitude, took her hands. "Thank you, Ngozi. Thank you for never giving up on me. I was foolish, lazy, and selfish, but you saw something in me that I didn't see myself." Ngozi smiled, her heart full of love and pride. "I believed in you, Chijioke. I always knew that with love and patience, you could become the man you were meant to be." From that moment forward, Chijioke became not just a hard-working husband and father, but also a community leader, employing many and investing in the future of his village. And Ngozi, now running her own successful wrapper business, was happy to finally live the life she had always dreamed of.